Louis Weber. Weber serves as a commissioner of cultural affairs for the city of Chicago, but that's only the latest in what has been the extraordinary string of experience and careers. In the early 1950s, for example, Weber ran a drama troupe in Chicago. In 1956, she decided to stage a festival to mark the centenary and George Bernard Shaw's birth, and then began putting out the newspaper devoted to Shaw, which mutated into an underground alternative weekly called The Paper. On Friday night, people from all over the city would gather there for editorial meetings. William Friedkin, who would go on to direct The French Connection and The Exorcist, was the regular, as was the attorney Elmer Gage, who was one of the Nathan Leopold attorney, and some of the editors for the Playboy, which was just up the street. People like Art Farmer and Thelonious Monk and John Coltrane and Lenny Bruce would stop by when they were in town. Bruce actually lived in Weisberg for a while. My mother was hysterical about it, especially one day when she rang the doorbell and he answered in a bath towel. Weisberg said, "We had a window on the porch and he didn't say have a key, so the window was always left open for him. There were a lot of room in that house and a lot of people stayed there, and I didn't know where they were there. I never could stand his jokes. I didn't really like his act. I couldn't stand all the words he was using." After the paper folded, Louise took a job doing public relations for an injury rehabilitation institute. From there, she went to work for a public interest law firm called BPI. And while at BPI, she became obsessed with the fact that Chicago's parks were scrambling and neglected, so she gathered together a motley collection of nature lovers, historians, civic activities, and housewives, and founded a loving group called Friends of the Parks. Then she became alarmed because commuter railroad then ran along the south shore of Lake Michigan from South Bend to Chicago was about to shut down. So she gathered together a motley collection of railway enthusiasts, environmentalists, and commuters and founded the South Shore Recreation and saved the railroad. Then she became executive director of the Chicago Council of Lawyers, a progressive legal group. Then she ran a local congressman's campaign. Then she got a position of director of special events for the first black mayor of Chicago, Harold Washington. Then she quit government and opened a small stand in a flea market. Then she went to work for Mayor Richard Daley, where she is to this day, and Chicago's Commissioner of Cultural Affairs. If we go through the history and keep count, the number of the words that Lois said belong to comes to 8. The actor, the writer, the doctor, the lawyer, the park lover, the politician, the railroad bulbs, and the flea market aficionados. When I asked Weisberg to make her own list, she came up with 10 because she added the architects and the hospitality industrial people she works in her current job. But she was probably being modest, because if you look harder, Weisberg's life, you could probably subdivide her experience into 15 or 20 worlds. They aren't separate worlds, though. The point about connector is that by having a foot in so many different worlds, they have an effect of bringing them all together once, and this would have been in the mid-1950s. Weisberg took the train to New York to attend on a whim the science fiction writer convention where she met a young writer by the name of Arthur C. Clarke. Clarke took her shine to Westburg, and next time he was in Chicago, he called her up. He was at a pay phone. Marcy recalls, he said, "Is there anyone in Chicago I should meet?" I told him to come over to my house. Ellsberg has a low, raspy voice, baked hard by half a century nicotine, and she forged between sentences to give herself the opportunity for a quick pop. Even when she's not smoking, she forged away as if to keep her on practice for those moments when she is. I called Bob Hoggers. Bob Hoggers was one of the people who wrote for my paper first. I said, "Do you know anyone in Chicago interested in talking to Arthur Clarke?" He said, "Yeah, Isaac Asimov is in town. And this guy, Robert Heinlein." So they all came over and sat in my study. Then they called over to me and they said, "Louis." I can't remember the word they used. They had some words for me. It was something about how I was the kind of person who bring people together. This is in some ways the archetypal Louis Weisberg story. First, she reached out to somebody, to someone outside her world. She was in drama at the time. Arthur Clarke wrote science fiction, then equally important, that person responded to her. Lots of us reach out to those different from ourselves, or to those more famous or successful than we are. But that gesture isn't always reciprocated. Then there's the fact that then Arthur Clarke comes to Chicago and wants to connect it to be linked up with someone else. Ellsberg come up with Isaac Asimov. She said it was fluke that Asimov was in town, but if it wasn't Asimov, it would have someone else. One of the things that people remember about Weisberg's Friday night salons back in the 1950s was that they were always effortlessly, logically integrated. The point is not that without the salon, black wouldn't have socialized with white on the north side. It was rare back then, but it happened. The point is that when black socialized with whites in the 1950s in Chicago, it didn't happen by accident. It happened because a certain kind of person made it happen. That's what Asimov and Clarke means when they say the iceberg has these things, whatever it is, to bring people together. She doesn't have any kind of snobbery, says Wendy Willis, who used to work up Weisberg. I once went with her on a trip to someone's professional photography studio. People write her letter and she looked at all of her mail, and the guy who owned the studio invited her out and she said yes. He was basically a wedding photographer. He decided to check it out. I was thinking, oh my god, do we have to hike out 45 minutes to this studio? It was out by the airport. This is the Commissioner of Cultural Efforts of the City of Chicago you are talking about. Passengers thought he was incredibly interesting. Was he actually interesting? Who knows? The point is that Louis found him interesting because, in some way, she finds everyone interesting. Weisberg, one of her friends, told me, always says, "Oh, I met the most wonderful person. You are going to love her." And she's ensued about this person, and she was about the first person she has met, and you know what, she's usually right. Helen Doria, another of her friends, told me that Roy sees things in you and that you don't even see in yourself, which is another way of saying the same thing. backed by some marvelous quirk of nature, Royce and other people like her have some instinct that helps them relate to the people they met. When Westberg looks out at the wall, or when Roger Hasso sits next to you on an airplane, they don't see the same world that the rest of us see. They see possibility. And while most of us are busily chewing whom we would like to know and rejecting the people who don't look right or who live out the effort, and whom we haven't seen in 65 years, Royce and Roger like them all. 4. There is a very good example of the way connectors functioning in the work of the sociologist Mark Granoveller. In his classic 1974 study, Getting a Job, Granoveller looked at several hundred professional and technical workers from the